welcome to my very first LinkedIn Live. I'm so excited to have you all join today in a conversation about me at my best and what that means for each of us. So the way I often begin this conversation is with sharing this incredibly inspiring quote from one of my favorite authors. His name is William Finnegan. And in this book of his, which is called Barbarian Days, he has this incredible quote in which he says, as we got closer to the lineup, the power and the beauty of the waves got more drenching. A set rolled in, shining and roaring in the low winter afternoon sun, and my throat clogged with emotion. Some nameless mess of joy, fear, love, lust, and gratitude. So while that line certainly describes what his life is like as a surfer, it also describes what me at my best looks like for him. So this is something that I've thought a lot about for myself. Like, what is me at my best? So me at my best for me is when I'm kind of channeling my inner gymnast. I was a competitive gymnast growing up and also when I was at Stanford. And so when I'm out on a bluff doing a handstand, that's me at my best. Or me at my best is when I'm channeling my own inner William Finnegan and doing my best to conquer my fear of waves and I surf. Or me at my best is when I'm speaking at events like this. Or me at my best is when I'm meeting new people. Or me at my best is when I'm with those people who I love or have loved the most. So that's me at my best for me. Now, you might be thinking about what me at my best looks like for you, and it might be time with your family or time when you're doing great work or time when you're reaching your dreams in one way or another, or it might be best said by Maya Angelou when she said, "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to fully thrive and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style." So let's hear it from you all. If you would, go ahead and type into the chat here, what does me at my best look like for you? And I've got April on my team here who's helping out with this. Sally, thanks so much for your note here. I'm glad to have you here. So if you would just write out in a couple of words, what does me at my best look like for you? And April, maybe you can help out with this as well. Maybe you can write out a couple of words, what me at my best looks like for you. I know we've also got Sears on here. What does me at my best look like for you? So we can kind of get a sense of what that looks like for each of us. So as you all are doing that, okay, good. So thanks, April. For me, it's feeling energetic. Absolutely. Andrea, solo on the trails and running in the sun. Oh, I love that. Thanks for that, Andrea. And then Brett, thanks for joining. Being active and being outdoors. Susan says, well, I'm able to help someone else. Chris, thanks so much for being here. Integration of head, heart, body, and mind. I love that. Corey, thanks for being here. It's having fun. Asif, thanks for being here, sharing knowledge to my patients. Love that. Shweta says, me at my best is my passion to write. I'm a freelance wellness writer. Oh, I love that. I could certainly use some of that. Needing to channel my inner writer. Colleen, being a resource to someone else. Tracy says, for me, it's my Peloton time. Good for you. We've got taking care of others. Sally says, when the worries of life are gone and I'm having an incredible ride on a horse. My sister is actually an equestrian as well, so that's great. Peter, thanks for being here. A public reading from my book. Excellent. And then Chang shares, me at my best is accomplishing the things I have to get done for the day. Me at my best is when I make the bed. When I do those simple things to kind of get on with my day. That's great. And Shweta, thanks for the hearts there. Caden shares, me at my best is lifting weights and getting a good sweat in. Emily says that running at sunset. So lots of things around movement. And certainly, as you all know, movement is a big thing. As the name suggests, motion infusion movement is a big thing in helping me to be my best. And it's great to see that that's the case for so many others as well. Nikki shares, me at my best is when I'm speaking on resilience, teaching mindfulness, creating, building business, and most importantly, connecting with and serving others. And then Joanne shares yoga, Pilates, and Tai Chi. So wonderful to hear all of these thoughts around what me at my best means for each of you. And if you think about it, oh, and Edwina just shared here my kickboxing session. I love that. So if you think about it, truly, what matters more than each of us becoming our version of me at my best? What matters more than becoming our better selves? So let's take a moment here. I want to talk a little bit about what does this really mean? There's been a lot of discussion in wellness for a long time around what is well-being and what does well-being mean in its truest, deepest sense. So again, this is something I really encourage you to write in the chat here about how would you define what me at my best means, or what well-being in its truest, deepest sense actually means. And it's interesting, I'm actually part of a Google Vitality Lab that's really trying to define what does vitality mean? What does well-being mean? So Jennifer writes here, oh, thank you, Jennifer. Laura, you are such an inspiration. Thanks. I so appreciate that. So we might say that well-being in its simplest sense is about each of us being human beings. As human beings, we are wired to move. Certainly something that I heard a lot of you talking about me at my best is when you're moving. Deep presence, Andrea shared here, is me at my best. Me at my best, or being well is when we're able to take breaks as we are designed to do as human beings. Feeling centered and strong and joyful. Thank you so much for that, Tracy. Corey writes, dialed in, rocking it, feeling it, awesome. But I often like to say that well-being is really the bridge between where we are versus where we would like to be. So we all have this vision of what me at my best looks like for each of us. But the problem is that I think a lot of us, while we may have this envision, we may be able to envision what me at my best looks like, we're not necessarily becoming that. So my aunt had this great sticker that was on her refrigerator that said, the bridge between despair and hope is a good night's sleep. So it's those basics really that help to bridge the gap between where we are versus where we'd like to be. So I want to see some of the things that people have said. Shweta says, while wellness is the journey, well-being is the destination. It's simply about being fully fulfilled. As you, Brett writes, happiness. Meredith, being able to laugh. Absolutely. There's actually a great book that just came out called Humor Seriously, which is about all the benefits of laughter. So one of the exercises that I recommend a lot of times to help each of us to enact our positive mindset is to name 3 good things. But one of the things that these co-authors suggested, and one practice that I'm starting to bring, is to name 3 times that I laughed during the day. So interesting exercise for you all to try. Okay, Tracy writes, being well is being selfish about me. It's okay to make myself a priority. And absolutely, and interestingly enough, when we kind of engage in our self-care, it's actually one of the most giving things that we can do. It can feel selfish, but actually it creates this small contagion effect where it actually gives permission to our friends and our friends' friends and even our friends' friends' friends for them to do the same. And so Edwina writes, taking care of yourself, being aware, and Caden, being mindful and present in the moment. So all great definitions of well-being and what that truly means. So what's really interesting about this is, while traditionally we've looked at well-being as being kind of those basics like eating well, moving enough, getting enough rest, there's some really interesting research showing what are some other things that really matter in helping us to become our best selves. So did you know that the number 1 predictor of longevity is in fact level of education? So this is something that's really striking for me. Prior to my being in this wellness space, I was actually an urban public high school teacher. And I often think about the fact that As an urban public high school teacher, I may have in fact been doing more to advance the well-being of our nation than what I'm doing in my role now in an explicitly focused role on well-being. Isn't that interesting? Another interesting thing to consider is that cheerful, optimistic people are less likely to develop heart disease. And did you know that when it comes to the health of your heart, your boss matters more than your doctor does? So this is something to keep in mind if you happen to be a manager. Boy, does your well-being, your engagement with well-being, and the extent to which you give permission to your team members to engage with their well-being, boy, does that matter a lot. So getting some really great comments coming in here. Emily writes that being well is feeling vibrant, having heightened senses. Chris writes, well, there may be many things that need to change. Take on only one or two. Absolutely. We are not being well when we feel pressure and stress that we are not enough. Chris, I can so relate to that. I think often about Brene Brown's comment in which she says, I am imperfect and I am enough. Even though I'm imperfect, I am enough. And that's something that has certainly been a journey for me, is reminding myself over and over that I am enough. Shweta writes here, my brother, as we both work from home, he gives me immense chances to laugh. And that is so great to have that. And April, love that, Shweta. Yes. April writes, I have 3 boys, so they give me lots of reasons to laugh. And then Jill writes, love the comment about, about how important your boss is for the health of your heart. So there's, a lot of discussions around, what are those key elements? The key elements that I tend to focus on are not only physical well-being, but also emotional well-being, social well-being. Dean Ornish, leading cardiologist, talks about how love and connection, there is nothing that matters more. And certainly in the time of a pandemic, when we're having to shelter in place, loneliness is a huge issue. So how can we foster those social connections even when we're so challenged? Financial well-being is another key element to overall well-being. Community well-being, how much we're connecting with our neighbors, how much we're giving back to our community. And then career well-being. So a question that I often like to ask is the question, would you say that the work that you do, is it a job? Is it a career? Or would you say that this is your calling? And very curious, what would you say for all of you who are listening in right now? Would you say that the work that you're doing right now is a job? Is it a career? Or is this your calling? And then thinking about what are those things that make the difference between it being a job that you clock in and out of, or versus it feeling like it's your calling. So the things that make the difference, one is having a best friend at work. So people who have a best friend at work are 7 times more likely to be highly engaged in their work. Having a deep sense of purpose in the work that you do is another thing that really matters. And then getting to use your strengths every day. Those people who are using their strengths, according to Gallup's research, are 6 times more likely to be highly engaged in their work. So let's see what we're getting here. Shweta says, definitely my calling. Meredith, it is my calling and it's my passion. Nikki writes here that well-being is flourishing. Love all of these. Andrea writes about how important it is to feel a sense of purpose in the work that you're doing. So career well-being, I think we've kind of separated that out from overall well-being, but Gallup research shows that those people who are thriving in their career are actually 50% more likely to be thriving overall. And certainly there's a lot of research showing that when we are unemployed for long stretches at a time, this may be one of life's greatest challenges. So one of my very close friends, she was without work for almost a year. And she was one of those people who was really impacted by the pandemic. And she finally is employed again. But that time of being unemployed was a huge challenge for her. And certainly that's the case for all of us. So again, really thinking about how well-being goes beyond just the basics, but it incorporates all of these different dimensions. And I'm curious, are there any other elements that I haven't spoken about that you personally think are really essential to overall flourishing and thriving. So Chris writes here, calling what the world needs and what my superpower, plus what my superpowers are. I love that. Nice way to recharacterize using your strengths, but really thinking about it in terms of your superpowers. What are your superpowers? And when each of us tap into our own superpowers, then we also help ourselves, but also help the world. So let's, really simply, I think well-being is about each of us living a life well led. And I often think about Bronnie Ware. So Bronnie Ware was a hospice nurse, and she worked with dying patients for over 15 years. And during this time, she heard the same kinds of themes come up over and over and over again from these dying patients. And I'm curious, what do you think was the number one dying regret? Any guesses here as to what the number one dying regret was? And so while you're thinking about that, I'm going to share one of the dying regrets that she heard over and over again. Was a dying regret, I wish I had let myself be happier. Isn't that interesting? So not I wish I had been happier, but I wish I had let myself be happier. So that was one of the dying regrets, but not the number one. So Nikki writes here, relationships. Yep. So that was one that came up. Specifically, I wish I had spent more time with, stayed in touch with my friends better, my good friends. Corey writes, use of time. Tracy, worrying too much, broken relationships. Madison writes, well, I'll tell you what the number one was. Spending more time with family and friends. Didn't play enough, says Chris. Built up anger, Caden says. Okay, here it is. Nobody said it yet, but let me know if this resonates for you. Not telling someone how you felt about them, Janice writes. Interesting. Yes, pretty close. So the number one dying regret was, I wish I had led a life true to myself, not the ones that others expected of me. Isn't that amazing? So I'm often inspired by Martha Graham, who was, as you all probably know, a pioneer in modern dance. And I had a stint as a professional dancer. And so Martha Graham is a heroine for me. And she once wrote, if I could say it, I wouldn't have to dance it. So isn't that a great example of somebody who really lived her life in a way that was true to herself, not one that was expected of her? And so getting some nice comments here about that. So the real question is, we're all able to kind of envision what me at my best looks like for you. And certainly there's been lots of conversations around what are those key elements to becoming our better selves. But why is it that there is such a disconnect between what we each want, which is to become our better selves, and what we're actually able to do? So on a really, really basic level, when we talk about well-being, we talk about the basics. So the basics, what I was talking about before, if we were to all do 3 simple things, if we were to not smoke, if we were to exercise enough, eat healthy, as a nation, we could collectively prevent up to between 70 to 90% of the major chronic diseases. We all know this, right? I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who doesn't know that it's a good idea to exercise, eat well, not smoke. And yet, despite the fact that we all know this, less than 3% of Americans do those 3 basic things. Why? Why is there such a divide between what we know we should do and what we actually do? Or if we consider, for example, how many of you set New Year's resolutions? This is something that many of us do. And yet a couple of months in, about 80% of us have kind of let those New Year's resolutions go by the wayside. So why is it that we may well have a clear idea of what me at my best looks like? We may have a clear idea about what the bridge is between where we are versus what we'd like to do, where we'd like to be, and what those practices are that we need to be implementing on a daily basis. but it's so hard to get ourselves to actually enact upon those practices that we know we need to do. So, Meredith's writing here, yes, be real. Oh, I love it. So Meredith, you're writing that in relation to that top dying regret. What about, why there's such a disconnect here? So Corey writes, requires continuous reflection and evaluation. Life is dynamic. Absolutely. So other thoughts around why there's such a huge divide between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do. So Edwina writes, having a hard time committing. Absolutely. Chris writes, the key to habits is to shape the habit, to have some habit support. Yeah, absolutely. And Corey writes, need to know our why, our intrinsic motivators. Absolutely. So I want to dig into that a little bit more. So, if we've got this exploding industry. Did you know that the wellness industry now is the world's fastest growing industry? So you think that would be super healthy. Or if we just look at how much we invest in healthcare in the United States, we spend 2.5 times more per capita than any other country in the world. So you'd think that we would be super healthy. We're not. And this is even pre-pandemic. So why is that? So if we look just at the world of self-help books, this genre, so Girl Wash Your Face, or Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, or Angela Duckworth's book about grit, these kinds of books have single-handedly bumped up nonfiction book sales by 9% over the past several years. And yet, with all this discussion around individual habit formation, we don't seem to be doing a better job of it. And so why is that it's so hard to do for each of us to be able to really form better habits and really sustain those better habits? And so looking at some other things, Caden writes, the first step is always the hardest, getting over the first hump. People don't always associate changing a behavior with the much more difficult challenge of changing the self. That's what Kelly writes here. Meredith writes, fear of others judging us. Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are all factors. But I really have come to agree more and more with people like Michael Marmot. So Michael Marmot writes, it is unreasonable to expect people to change their behavior when the social, cultural, and physical environments around them fully conspire against them. I think that that's really the key here. So while we often hear the expression that we are creatures of habit, I would argue that in fact, each of us is more creatures of culture. That is, we tend to adapt to the larger culture and environment that we happen to exist in. So we look, for example, at these blue zones, these parts of the world where kind of these pockets of longevity. So places like Okinawa, or places like Loma Linda, or places like Ikaria in Greece, where an extraordinarily high percentage of the people there not only live, but thrive into their hundreds. So are those people that much more motivated than the rest of us? No, of course not. The real issue is that they happen to have been lucky enough to have been born into one of these blue zones. And so all they're doing is simply adapting to the cultural norms. And so this is why I think that if we are truly to do a better job of helping everybody to realize their version of me at my best, we have to start taking more of an outside-in approach. So here are some questions to consider. Am I, or are you, healthier because of where you live or less so? And do the systems within wherever you happen to live, do they benefit you or do they work against you? And then dropping down a level, are you healthier, more able to become your better self because of the places that you go? And perhaps where you go is now in a virtual sense. So where you work, Are you healthier because of it or less so? Or where your kids go to school, even if it's in a virtual sense now, are they healthier because of it or less so? Or even the places that we gather. And again, albeit in a more virtual sense, perhaps today. Now, dropping down a level, are you healthier because of the teams that you're on? Are you healthier because of your boss or less so? And so, one of the things that I think that we can all start to do is start to just rewrite the script. So instead of saying over and over again, I need to take personal responsibility for my health and well being, as if it's only up to us. And of course, we can each of us can take measures to become our better selves. But I think a first step is for each of us to step back and to consider, okay, given the world that I live in, so for example, I live in San Francisco, and because I live in San Francisco, it's a little easier to be healthier. There's lots of natural resources here. I live a couple of blocks away from the water, right by Crissy Field. I'm motivated because there's all kinds of people who are out and about running and walking. So I live in an environment where it's really normal to engage with my health and well-being. So given the world that you live in, the places you go, so given where you work, given the teams that you're on, the boss that you work for, now how can you take personal responsibility for your health and well-being? So a first step, I think, is for each of us to just simply acknowledge how much these cultures, these kind of concentric circles of cultural and environmental circles, if you will, influence our capacity to be well. So lots of comments here coming in here. I love this. So Kelly writes, socio-ecological model of health promotion equals systems thinking. That's so crucial. Yep, thanks for that. Meredith writes, teams and people definitely make me healthier. Chris writes, I am healthier because of the conscious connections that I have created. So yeah, so it's kind of a two-way thing. So we kind of happen to be born into a neighborhood, for example, but then each of us has capacity to be able to join healthier cultural and environmental circles, if you will. So just pause for just a moment. So for example, when it comes to getting healthier, is it really about or getting more active, is it really about taking personal responsibility? Or might it have to do more with the fact that our roads are better designed for our cars than they are for us getting physically active? Or what's the first thing that we're teaching kids? We're teaching them to sit and be still. Or what's the first thing that somebody says when we come into their home or their office? Have a seat. So just take a moment to think about just how much those cultural norms really drive us to our chairs, really drive us toward poor health. So how can we start to counter that with healthier environments and cultures that we choose, if you will? But also, how can each of us be part of the solution so that we can all collectively take action to create healthier, happier, concentric circles of cultural and environmental influence? So how do we move forward? Well, I just want to leave you with some final thoughts around that. And I think that in our cultural context here in the United States, but I would say that if this is kind of increasingly around the world, we have this mandate to kind of put the individual first, that kind of individualism and standing out as an individual is what it's all about. And so it is no wonder that in the world of health and wellness, whether we're talking about me at my best, whether we're talking about becoming our healthiest selves, it's no wonder that we have heard these mantras that over and over again, that the key to wellness is to accept personal responsibility for your health and well-being. Well, if there is anything that we have learned from COVID, it is that my health matters to you and your health matters to me. That is the only way forward, is together. There is no me without you, and there is no you without me. We must move forward together. So whether it's helping each ourselves and one another to become our version of me at my best, this has to be executed on a collective basis. We cannot continue to look at this on an individual level. So with that, I want to see if there are any final comments about what's one thing you're going to take away from our discussion today. And also April has written in here. April, if you could go ahead and pop in there how people can join by text to engage in an ongoing conversation. If you'd like to join my newsletter, which comes out on a monthly basis, the newest one is coming out. And it looks like we are at the top of 30 minutes here. Peter, thank you so much for being here. So April, thanks for putting that in. So again, text Laura in all caps at 66866. And so great to get all of this great dialogue during our discussion today. So thank you all so much for being part of the discussion today about me at my best, why it matters, what it looks like for each of us, and what's a better way forward, which is for each of us to think about this on a collective level, how we can not only start with ourselves, but help one another to become, for each of us to become our version of me at my best. Thanks again for being part of the discussion today. So great to see all these comments coming in. And I'll see you next time at the next LinkedIn Live.